So today I'm going to talk you through a little bit of troubleshooting when it comes to resin. So what I've got here today is some resin art on a board that hasn't gone quite the way I wanted it to. So the problem here is that this board was already oiled. So resin doesn't like oil and it doesn't like silicone. So because this board was already oiled, I've ended up with my resin dripping off really patchy and it has just dried not quite level. As you can see, there's a few little bits of pitting happening here. But never fear, there is a way that you can fix this. So I'm going to walk you through the steps to make sure that you do not waste your cheese board, that you still get amazing resin art on your cheese board. Now just for comparison's sake, I've got two different cheese boards here. So this is the one that didn't turn out so great because it was oiled, whereas this board was raw timber. It didn't have any oil on it. So you can see along the sides, it hasn't split apart, it hasn't dripped away. It's coated those sides really nice and evenly and it matches the top of this beautiful purple and gold board. So whilst the boards look really nice when they're oiled, not great for resin. Okay, so I've got my resin all mixed up here. So I'm just using a 1-to-1 resin, equal parts A and B. I mixed this up probably like 10 minutes ago. Went and got a snack, came back. And the reason that I don't want to use this straight away is because this is a really simple pour. This is a little bit of blue and a bit of white, so really easy. You don't need to spend hours and hours trying to figure out what you're going to do. It's actually really like quick. So I actually want my resin to start to set up a little bit before I pour it. And that's just because it's going to be really thick and sticky, and we actually want it to be like pretty thick when we pour it on the board, just so it's A, going to stick, but B, we're going to get some really great cells happening in our white resin when we blow it back with a little bit of heat. So yeah, having your resin set up a little bit when you do your waves really helps get those cells happening. So while I've got my resin mixing and sitting over on the corner setting up a little bit, I'm going to take some sandpaper and just rough up the edges where the resin's dripped off, just to make sure that if there is still any raw oiled wood underneath here, that we rough it up with a little bit of sandpaper just to make sure the resin sticks as best as possible. So I'm just going to go ahead and just give it, it's a pretty rough sandpaper. I've got a, well, I don't even know what grit this is, but it's probably like a 150, 120. Not sure. Anyway, just give you a piece of rough sand, and you can also sand it in the bits along the front of the board where it's separated a little bit. So just give it a rough sand, and it doesn't matter if you sand over the old resin, as the new resin's going to fill in any of those scratches anyway. So just go to town and rough it up. So now that that's all sanded, you can see that the surface is a little bit roughed up. I'm just going to wipe it down with a baby wipe. Alcohol, actually an alcohol wipe would be ideal, but I don't have any alcohol ones on me. I've just got baby wipes. So I've got my resin divided into cups. So I've got my white resin here. As you can see, I've added quite a bit of pigment. It's really nicely pigmented and really opaque, so it's going to be awesome for creating our waves. So you can just pop that one to the side. And then I've got quite a bit of clear in my cup here. And I'm just going to use a little bit of blue dye. Because we're going on top of this layer here, you actually want some of this dimension and texture. There's a little bit of glitter going on here. So I actually want that to sort of shine through that bottom layer. So you want to be able to see all of the dimension, all of the different sort of crashing waves underneath. So adding a transparent layer of blue on top of that means that you get some really great dimension, and you don't cover up that first layer under there. So it's definitely not a mistake, that first layer. It can enhance your designs as well. Okay, so my resin's been sitting here for about 20 minutes all up, starting to cure a little bit because it's getting a bit warm to the touch in the cup. I can feel it. So I'm going to pour my blue on now, and then I'll wait a little bit longer before I do my white wave. So now I'm just scraping up that resin that's dripped off the edge of the board and just placing it on the sides of the board, kind of like icing a cake. If you're wearing gloves, which I should be wearing gloves, you can literally just get your finger and rub it along the edge of the board. So now I'll just keep scraping that resin off my board and placing it back on the top of it. Because I'm not in a rush. I need to wait for that white to set up a little bit, and I want to try and get a nice thick layer on this board anyway, so I might as well spend the time trying to put it all back on there, because why not? As you can see, the resin's starting to get real thick, and that's the point that we want to be doing our white wave layer. Also worth noting that if you really wanted all of these drip lines to be covered up, just use a more opaque pigment. Don't use a transparent ink. But I actually really like the way that it looks around the edges because it's almost like water crashing off a rock or something. So I wanted to keep that effect, but if you want to cover that up, just make sure that you use a pigment paste or something more opaque instead of an ink. So now it's time for my wave. Now you definitely don't have to pour the white line as thick as I did just there, but I wanted to cover up all of the old white resin underneath. So I made it nice and thick, and now I'll show you how to get that crashing wave effect. So now I just take my heat gun. This is literally just like a craft embossing gun from Spotlight, and you want to blow the white back over the blue. And because it's cured a little bit, it's going to take a few seconds to start moving, but once it moves, it'll be, you'll start to see those cells popping out. And also because it's a little bit thicker, it's not just gonna blow straight off. So there you go, guys, your ocean resin cheese board with beautifully coated edges all finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you try this out at home.